The sun dipped low behind the hills as the scent of freshly cut grass lingered in the spring air. The distant hum of crickets filled the evening, a familiar sound that often accompanies gatherings at my uncle's farmhouse. Every Easter, my extended family would converge here, about a dozen of us. The farmhouse sat on a large plot of land, surrounded by dense woods. It was the kind of place you could get lost in, even with the well-maintained trails. This year, I reluctantly agreed to join them, though I wasn't much for outdoor activities. The house, built in the 1800s, creaked with every step, and the worn wooden floors felt like they had absorbed the stories of generations. The main room was alive with laughter and the clinking of glasses, but I felt out of place, always the quiet one among them. My cousin Kevin, the closest to my age, was the only one who seemed to understand my discomfort. "Let's go for a walk," he suggested, his voice laced with an excitement I didn't share. "Get away from the crowd." I hesitated, but agreed. Kevin had always been the adventurous one, and part of me envied his confidence. So we slipped out of the back door and into the yard, our footsteps muffled by the soft grass beneath our shoes. The air was cool now, the breeze carrying the faint scent of pine from the woods. The woods behind Uncle John's farmhouse weren't a mystery to me, but there was something about them that always felt unnerving. The trees towered high, their thick trunks twisted with age, casting long, jagged shadows on the forest floor. Despite being familiar with the area, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods held secrets, things that didn't belong. But that night, it seemed different. More suffocating. We wandered deeper into the trees, our footsteps crunching the dry leaves underfoot. Kevin, with his usual confidence, led the way, but I couldn't help but glance back occasionally, half expecting to see something following us. It wasn't long before we heard it. The thudding. Slow. Methodical. It sounded like someone hammering something into the ground, or worse, into a tree. I froze, my heart racing. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Kevin cocked his head, listening. "It's probably just a hunter or someone setting up camp." But the pounding continued, rhythmic and unnerving. We followed the sound, drawn in by a strange compulsion neither of us could explain. It led us deeper into the woods, and with each step, the trees grew thicker, the shadows darker. We came to a clearing, and that's when we saw it. 3 large crosses, nailed into the trunks of the trees. But these weren't ordinary crosses. They were upside down, and they were nailed high, as if placed deliberately. The sight of them sent an icy chill down my spine. Kevin, usually unfazed by anything, stepped closer to inspect them. I stayed back, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. The air had grown heavier, like it was thick with something unseen. I could almost taste the tension in the atmosphere. "What do you think they mean?" Kevin asked, his voice strangely subdued. "I don't know," I replied, my throat tight. "But we need to go. This doesn't feel right." Just as I said that, we heard a rustling behind us, a movement too deliberate to be an animal. Kevin turned, his eyes narrowing. A man stepped out from the trees. His clothes were torn, a long jacket hanging loosely from his frame, his face obscured by a shadowy hood. He was tall, too tall. His posture was unnatural, almost rigid, like he had been standing there for a long time. His eyes locked onto ours, and there was something about his gaze, cold, calculating, that made my stomach churn. "You shouldn't be here," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. It wasn't a request. It was a command. We both froze, the world feeling suddenly small and suffocating. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. We're just looking around, Kevin stammered, his bravado slipping. We'll leave. The man's lips curled into a strange smile, but his eyes remained cold and distant. You won't leave until it's too late. With that, he turned and disappeared into the trees, moving with eerie silence. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind had died down, and the forest around us felt oppressively still. We didn't stick around to analyze the situation. Without a word, we turned back the way we came, my heart pounding in my chest. But the journey back was no easier. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, and every rustling sound in the trees felt like footsteps following us. By the time we made it back to the farmhouse, the evening was quiet. The laughter and chatter from inside had died down. The house felt oddly silent, as if everyone had been waiting for us. We didn't speak of what had happened in the woods. Neither of us could bring ourselves to mention the man or the crosses. That night, as I lay in the guest room, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The windows were shut tight, but I kept hearing soft tapping against the glass. I sat up, my heart racing, but when I looked outside, there was nothing. Still, I couldn't bring myself to close my eyes. The next morning, the unease lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the woods, the crosses, and his cryptic warning. Kevin and I had barely spoken since our return. It was as if we were both too afraid to acknowledge what had happened, too terrified to put it into words. Uncle John greeted us as we made our way down for breakfast, his warm smile cutting through the tension. "Did you boys have a good walk?" he asked casually, like nothing had happened. "Yeah." "Great," Kevin replied, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Later that morning, I went outside to get some fresh air. The sun was shining, but something about the yard felt different. The trees, the shadows, everything seemed off. And then I saw it. Out in the woods, in the same clearing where we had found the crosses, there were now faint flickers of light. At first, I thought it was just the sun glinting off the leaves, but then I realized there were people in the trees, figures standing silently, their faces hidden in the shadows. I rushed back inside, my breath coming in short gasps. I told Uncle John, but by the time he got out there, the figures had vanished. He didn't seem too concerned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something we shouldn't have. As the day dragged on, the unease never left me. Even when we sat down for dinner, the room felt too quiet, too still. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see a figure standing there, watching us. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The house creaked with every breeze, and the shadows outside seemed to grow longer, as if something was waiting just beyond the trees. I never went back to the woods, and neither did Kevin. To this day, I don't know who that man was or what those crosses meant. But one thing's for certain. We should have listened when he told us we shouldn't be there. I didn't know then, but now, I wonder if we were the ones being hunted. The warning had been clear, and though we couldn't understand it at the time, the woods had been watching us long before we ventured in. And I know now that some things should remain unexplored, because some shadows, once you see them, never leave. The sun had barely begun to rise over the small, quiet town when I woke up. It was Easter morning, but it didn't feel like a day of celebration. In fact, everything felt off. I was visiting my aunt and uncle's house in the countryside. They lived on the edge of town in an old farmhouse surrounded by fields and thick woods. It was a peaceful place, the kind of place you would imagine a family gathering would be full of laughter, joy, and good food. But this Easter, something felt different. The house was silent when I woke up, too silent. Normally, on holidays, there would be the sounds of my cousins running around, the smell of breakfast cooking. But today, it was eerily still. I figured maybe everyone was still asleep. I had stayed up late the night before, talking to my aunt in the kitchen, so I didn't think much of it. I pulled on my sweatshirt and wandered downstairs. The old wooden stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended into the dark hallway. The kitchen was empty. The smell of pancakes, bacon, and coffee lingered faintly in the air, but no one was around to make it. I called out, "Aunt Sarah? Uncle Bill?" But my voice echoed back at me, hollow and empty. A strange sense of unease settled in my stomach. I headed outside to the back porch, hoping to find someone, or at least some sign of life. The sky was clouded over, and the morning light barely filtered through the trees. As I walked out the door, the chill of the air made me shiver, though it was still early spring. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange. Just past the edge of the woods, near the tree line, there was a figure standing perfectly still. At first, I thought it was one of my cousins playing a prank, but as I got closer, my heart began to pound. The figure was facing the house, unmoving. It wasn't one of my cousins. It was a man, a tall figure with an old, worn-out jacket and a hat that cast his face in shadow. For a second, I stood frozen. The man didn't seem to notice me. His presence felt wrong, like he didn't belong there, like he was out of place. I looked around to make sure no one else was nearby, but the house was still quiet, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. I took a cautious step forward. "Hey, are you lost?" I called out. The man didn't respond. His posture was stiff, his head slightly tilted downward, as if he were listening for something or perhaps waiting. There was something unnerving about the way he stood there, motionless. Then, from nowhere, I heard a faint whisper. It was so quiet at first, I wasn't sure I had heard it at all. But as I stepped closer, the voice became clearer. It was a man's voice, deep and raspy. But there was no movement from the figure. It wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the air, as if it was surrounding me. "Don't come any closer," the voice whispered. My stomach churned with fear, and for a moment, I felt the cold grip of panic start to settle in. I should have turned around and gone back inside, but my curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I called out again, louder this time. "Who are you?" The man's head tilted further, his body still unmoving. The whispering voice came again, clearer now, though it was as if it was coming from every direction at once. It wasn't just a warning, it felt like a threat. "Go back, or you'll be next." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands were shaking, and my breath came in shallow gasps. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a gut feeling that this wasn't just some stranger. There was something deeply wrong about him. Without thinking, I turned to run back to the house. But as I did, something strange happened. A cold gust of wind swept through the clearing, and I heard the whisper again. This time, it was louder, almost as if it was right behind me. You can't leave? Not yet. I glanced over my shoulder, but the man hadn't moved. He was still standing at the edge of the trees, his presence hauntingly unchanged. But the voice, it was coming closer, and with each passing second, the feeling of dread grew stronger. I reached the door of the house and flung it open, slamming it behind me. My heart was racing, and my head was spinning. The whispering had stopped, but the air in the house still felt heavy, as if something was lingering just beyond my reach. I called for my aunt and uncle again, but still, no response. The house felt emptier than ever, and the silence was deafening. I rushed upstairs to their bedroom, where I found the door slightly ajar. When I opened it, I was hit with the smell of something rancid, a foul odor that made my stomach churn. And then I saw it. On the floor, in the middle of the room, lay my aunt and uncle, motionless, their eyes wide open but completely blank, as if they were staring at something only they could see. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no obvious cause of death. They just looked empty, like their souls had been sucked away. I stumbled backward, horrified. But before I could react, I heard the voice again, this time coming from the room next to me, faint but unmistakable. "Now, it's your turn." My blood ran cold. I turned and looked out the window, and there, standing at the edge of the woods, was the man again. He was watching me, the shadows of the trees swallowing his figure, his face still hidden under the brim of his hat. But there was something more terrifying about his expression now. It wasn't just passive anymore. It was a smile, a cold, twisted grin that sent a wave of nausea through my body. I grabbed the phone from my pocket, but as soon as I unlocked it, I noticed something strange. The screen flickered, the image distorting, and then the whispering voice seemed to rise from the phone itself, loud and clear. "Don't even think about calling for help." The phone went dead in my hand, and I was left alone in that room, with the cold weight of fear pressing in on me. I didn't know who the man was or why he was here, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever he wanted, he wasn't leaving until he got it. I didn't wait to find out. I bolted out of the house, running as fast as I could toward the nearest neighbor's place, praying to God that someone would be awake and ready to help. As I ran, I glanced over my shoulder. The man was still there, standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. His smile remained, his eyes never leaving me as I ran for my life. I didn't go back to that farmhouse. No one did. The police came later, but they found nothing. No trace of my aunt or uncle, no sign of the mysterious man. Nothing to explain what had happened. But I know what I saw. And I will never forget the whispering man who haunted the woods that Easter morning. It was meant to be a peaceful weekend, a getaway from the hustle of the city, a chance to reconnect with family and celebrate Easter in the quiet serenity of the woods. We, the Parker family, had rented a small rustic cabin tucked away in a secluded part of the forest. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine trees filled our lungs as we unloaded the car and made our way inside. I, Sarah, the eldest of 3 siblings, had arranged the whole trip. It was a tradition, albeit a new one. This was only our 2nd year doing something like this. The first time, We spent the day hiking and ended it with a simple dinner in the cabin, followed by an evening of games and laughter. This year, it was supposed to be the same, but from the moment we arrived, something felt off. The stillness of the woods, the way the wind didn't seem to rustle the leaves, everything felt too quiet, too perfect. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The night was clear, and the stars glittered like diamonds in the sky. The fire pit was crackling as we sat around it, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Dad was talking about a local legend he'd heard when we first arrived, about a mysterious figure that haunted the woods, but none of us took it seriously. At some point, around midnight, we all grew quiet. The fire was dying down, and the warmth of the flames seemed to pull us into a false sense of security. It was then I noticed it, a faint sound coming from the trees, a rustle, soft at first, like something, or someone, moving between the trees. I glanced at my brother, Jason, but he was too busy with his marshmallow to notice. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to my mother. She gave me a reassuring smile, but even she couldn't hide the slight crease in her brow. It was the first time I saw her look uncertain all night. We sat there for a moment, listening. But then, there was another sound, closer this time, like footsteps on the ground, heavy and deliberate. I stood up, my heart racing. "I'm going to check it out," I said, though the words left my mouth without thinking. I walked cautiously toward the edge of the woods, straining my ears for any sign of movement. The darkness enveloped me, and the beam of my flashlight barely cut through it. I knew the path well, but something felt different tonight. The trees, which had once looked inviting, now seemed to close in on me, their gnarled branches reaching like claws toward the sky. I called out into the night, hoping to shake off the feeling of being watched. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" No response. I stepped off the path and into the underbrush, my boots crunching on the leaves. Then I heard it again, a rustling sound, followed by a low, almost inaudible breathing. It was coming from just ahead. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath caught in my throat. The sound was too rhythmic to be an animal. It was human. Before I could move, I felt the sudden, overwhelming sensation that I wasn't alone. The air around me grew colder, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. I spun around, but there was nothing. Only the trees, standing in oppressive silence. But as I turned back to face the path, I saw something that froze me in place. Two eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness. They were too high off the ground to be any animal, and they were staring directly at me. I backed away slowly, my pulse hammering in my chest. The eyes remained fixed on me, unmoving. With every step I took, they followed, never blinking, never wavering. "Mom! Dad!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the vastness of the forest. I turned and ran back toward the cabin, my breath ragged in my throat. The distant sounds of footsteps began to follow, but they weren't as far behind as before. Something, or someone, was moving fast. When I reached the cabin, I slammed the door shut behind me, my heart racing. My parents looked at me with wide eyes, fear creeping onto their faces. "Sarah, what's wrong?" my father asked, his voice steady but concerned. "There's someone out there. I saw eyes," I stammered, my voice shaking. "They were watching me." Jason laughed nervously. "It's probably just a deer or something. You know, animals in the woods." But I knew it wasn't an animal. Those eyes had been far too human. As the night dragged on, the fear gnawed at us. We locked every window and door, but the feeling of being watched never left. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind seemed to bring with it the shadow of something just beyond the walls. Around 2 a.m., the lights flickered once, then twice. The house groaned under the weight of the cold air outside. And then, there it was, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, soft but purposeful, coming from the porch. It was too heavy to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. We huddled together in the living room, our breaths shallow. My father grabbed the phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The footsteps stopped right outside the front door. Silence. And then, nothing. The house was still. Minutes passed, each one stretching on like an eternity. But then, something moved in the darkness outside. A figure, tall and slender, slipping between the trees, its face obscured by the shadows. It was watching us, just out of reach. The figure lingered for what felt like hours, until finally it turned and disappeared into the woods. The next morning, we woke to an eerie stillness. The sun had risen, but the tension hadn't lifted. The forest seemed too quiet, as if everything had been waiting for us to leave. We packed up quickly, each of us avoiding eye contact. No one spoke of the events of the night. We couldn't bring ourselves to. But as we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The woods were behind us, but in the distance, I could just make out a figure standing between the trees, watching us drive away. Its eyes glowed faintly, as if the night had never ended. We never went back to that cabin. The place remained abandoned, just as it had been before. But every year, when Easter rolls around, I can't help but feel the weight of those unseen eyes following me. No matter where I am, they are out there, waiting. And no matter how far we run, they'll always be watching.